It's been going around for some time now. It's been showing up in the media a lot lately. The whole idea, the phenomenon that video games are addictive. Now, we've recently had a bunch of studies showing that X amount of kids are now considered to be addicted to video games. And there was the recent case in Canada where a certain young man almost lost his life because he had engaged in 16-hour gaming sessions. This is also being acknowledged by the World Health Organization and the UN that gaming addiction, particularly video games, not gambling, is increasingly becoming a problem in the developed world. Now, frankly, I'm not surprised this is happening. We've seen a rise of a lot of problems. We've seen an increase in the amount of mental illness in many countries. We've seen addiction rates begin to go up, except in the few cases where a country has completely legalized drugs and sought out very heavy rehabilitation programs. I mean, for us as Marxists, we already know that this is alienation and something that is going to get worse the longer capitalism goes on and continues to degenerate. It's not surprising that young people who are the easiest victims of this kind of thing are unaware of what's happening to them. For the most part, they can understand unfairness. Things aren't as great as they're generally told. I mean, this was something I had to experience by going out into the working world. But the rate of degeneration is now far higher today than it was when I experienced it. And I think a lot of young people are seeing the truth of, what's going on. Those who bother to pay attention, they're starting to see how bad things really are. They're beginning to see that there really isn't anything for them in the future. Now, I'm sure a lot of them would say, well, they're going to have a job, they're going to be okay, but I think they understand that things are not going to get better. I think young people are fully aware that things are only going to get worse. And that's a very devastating thing for someone so young to understand. For someone my age to see, things aren't going to get better, that's kind of something I came to peace with quite a while ago. It's easier for me as a grown adult to understand that kind of thing. But for someone who's in their teens, the prospect of the entire life that's before them going to be something that's just going to degenerate and is not going to get better is something that can be terribly frightening to them, even if they don't consciously realize that's what's happening. I think that the vulnerability of young people in this case, they're much more susceptible to negative thinking. Now, in this case, I don't think it's negative thinking. It's very real. It's not just something they think. But the negative thoughts that accompany these material conditions will have a much greater effect on young people than it will on adults. So this naturally begins a process of trying to get away from it. Now, I can understand. My escape when I was a teenager was television. It wasn't so much video games as TV. And the rates of TV are going down, and the rates of video games are going up. Video games are a hell of a lot better than they were when I was a teenager than when I was a kid. Much more engrossing and very much something that you can get into, like you could feel a part of. And it's not surprising that when you combine that kind of alienation, that kind of recognition of how bad things are, and then you combine it with something that you can escape into, like video games, that's a very dangerous combination. Too many are very quick to just blame video games for everything. Oh, look, look at the violence. Oh, they played video games, therefore video games are the problem. Oh, that's this generation. They just want to play video games. They don't want to work or go to school or anything like that. And I think that's pointing out and attacking the symptom, not the problem. Young people are facing something that, frankly, didn't really exist in my day, and certainly didn't in the days of those who are even older than me. We've got to start realizing that there's something wrong with society itself, and simply blaming guns for shootings or blaming video games for alienated kids is nonsense. The increasing amount of at-risk youth, I do think it's definitely increasing, and it's probably greater than it was when I was a kid. But the manifestation of it is different. This alienation is occurring in a different context. Instead of so much going out and getting into trouble to try to feel something that they're probably lacking, or to find some kind of expression that reflects how disappointed they are with things and the way society is going, I think video games have been much more of an escape than an expression through crime the way it was when I was a teenager. And I think that's a significant difference that appears now than there was back then. So I think that while we might be able to say that some killing in a video game is a form of operant conditioning, it doesn't deal with the underlying issue itself, and that is an alienating society, capitalist alienation, commodity relations, replacing the relations between people. And I think that's very much true. This alienation has led to more video games, and that interaction through online games has replaced the games that we played outside. Playing soccer, playing basketball, or particularly street hockey, and the relations between kids that you would have then have been replaced by the commodity relation of video games and the online chats. And it's interesting that how in an increasingly connected world, we are increasingly disconnected from each other. That's a contradiction to think about. But I this really just reminds us that we have to do something about the system itself, and that those who are ingratiated with the system, those who are a part of the system, not necessarily just in support of it, but are fully functioning members of it, politicians and members of parliament or the Senate or what have you, don't have an answer. All they can do is try to put a band-aid on the problem. They can't get rid of capitalist alienation unless you get rid of capitalism. And that's where we really do have to go with this. We can't just keep trying to block out the sun rather than deal with the economic system that's causing the mass pollution to begin with. So I think young people are probably more screwed today than they were when I was a teenager. And when I was a teenager, I had, my own problems to deal with. I had many issues that had to be dealt with. But I think that while many of these issues still continue to this day, those issues are placed in a very different context than the context that I experienced these things. The social alienation, having trouble making friends, etc. So, as a bottom line, I mean, we're going to see more of this. We're going to see more of video games being blamed as the problem for the addiction behind it by the same people who would not want to deal with the thing that causes the problem to begin with. When we look at the addiction rates that are going on with kids for video games, we're going to start seeing the same kind of thing. Blame the gun, or someone will blame the shooter, but nobody's going to blame the society that has something wrong with it that's creating these conditions for these alienations to exist. Video games are like guns in that they are inanimate objects. You have to choose to pick it up and use it. But we also have to do something about the system that makes people want to pick them up and use them. And that's the problem that we face right now, because that's not what's being addressed. And if we don't address this, things for young people are going to get worse. And the generation after them are going to be even worse. I can see, how much it's gotten worse just from when I was a teenager to teenagers today. And it frightens me to think of what it's going to be like in another 20 years when the next generation of teenagers comes along and things are even worse. So, again, it's just one of those things where we really got to get together and start dealing with the problem of society itself. Not the problems in society, but the problem of society. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.